things might get a little bit heated as we talk about fire giants. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Today talking about fire giants, those fiery behemoths, those tyrannical militaristic overseers wading into battle with their finely crafted arms and armor, those well-honed swords, and they just reap and scythe through and create a bloody toll on whatever battlefield they happen to bestride. They are terrifying and fun. They're so satisfying to fight, and they've been a classic staple of fantasy gaming for a long time, since first edition Dungeons & Dragons, if I'm remembering correctly, and they've made their way over to Pathfinder and to a limited extent over into Starfinder as well. But, like so many other fantasy races, particularly the evil ones, they kind of get a little bit samey. I mean, between Pathfinder and 5th edition, the only real difference between them is that one describes them as lumpy, misshapen, ugly, warded, and the others not so much. Otherwise, they are essentially more or less the same. I mean, functionally anyways. There's only so many ways you can go with disciplined, lawful, tyrannical, evil, militaristic overlords. That kind of sets you into a pretty comfortable, familiar space. And it is comfortable for a reason, but as we said before, it just is a little bit repetitive. And so today we are going to take a look at what we can do to get that changed up. But before we go into any of those details, if you're new here to the channel, then go on down there to hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Get yourself listed on that legendary roster of adventurers. Or if you've already gone ahead and done such a thing, thank you by the way, go on down to hit those like or dislike buttons and leave your comments and thoughts down below. Certainly I'll be more than happy to receive them and engage in discussion with you. But now with all of that said, let's go ahead and start talking about what we can do to change fire giants up. So, what do we know about fire giants, aside from, giants being very much a part of Scandinavian folklore and the like, the ancient stories of the Einherjar, and I apologize for butchering that, but the Einherjar warriors fighting the different Jotun, believe it's pronounced as Jotun, the different giants and becoming giant slayers, those ancient myths and legends, and also the Salish and the Kootenai tribes up in the area that I live here. They have legends about fighting giants as well. They're tall, powerful, humanoid, terrifying creatures, and fire giants in particular live in regions of volcanic activity or intense fiery activity, hence the name fire giants. They're immune to these effects, and the fumes, those toxic fumes that get put off by volcanic activity, are refreshing and familiar to them, while to any guests or opponents that might be trying to make unexpected visits to their chambers will find them noxious, toxic, and eventually lethal. So it definitely presents some unique and interesting challenges. And so they're a subterranean race, and they have that immunity to fire. Not only that, but they are renowned for their craftsmanship in metalwork. And that their metalwork, in some cases, in many cases, being compared to that of dwarven metalwork. Something that incenses and outrages the dwarves pretty frequently, no matter what setting you're looking at. And that's an interesting thing right there, and that's plenty for us to start digging into, right? That without even having to compare or throw them into real world cultures that we could use to make them interesting. Because we've already covered going over the old Scandinavian, the old Norse cultures, and we could certainly put the fire giants closer back into that. The Scandinavian peoples had some incredible mail armor, but let's just see what we can do to change up their culture as it currently exists by restructuring and changing just a few things. So, that enmity that exists, dwarves already have a legacy of hatred towards giants, and they have received bonuses for fighting giants for a long time. Given that they both live in mountainous regions, they are frequently coming into contact with one another. So it only makes sense that they would come into contact with fire giants regularly as well and pit their arms and armaments against one another. And so for our setting and our purposes, generally one of the first things we try to do is remove the lawful evil requirement for fire giants. Certainly you can still find groups of lawful evil fire giants, but if we just remove the necessity for the evil aspect and make that not be a strict requirement for them anymore, you can still leave lawful, still leave them disciplined, organized, and structured, but on the moral side of things rather than the axis of law versus chaos, leave that in place, but remove the moral constraints there and allow them to kind of move pretty freely between neutrally good or good aligned, or even evil aligned, as such things will happen. So letting them move back and forth between there frees up a lot for us already. And given the enmity between dwarves and fire giants that exists, and the fact that they are going to be coming into contact one another frequently, well, let's think about what we did to homebrew our world already by making dwarves, the dwarves neighbors with ogres, and the ogres being closer trade allies with the orcs, and the orcs going with more of the Mongol kind of cultural structure to keep in with that nomadic tribalistic lifestyle, but still these powerful horse archers that are able to construct these bows that these more Teutonic, Germanic inspired ogres are going to be able to wield with a deadly effect. And that they're close neighbors with other cultures as well. And far off across the sea, we have them being allied, have the Spartan-styled hobgoblins being more trade partners with the Mughal Empire Warforged. The Mughal Empire Warforged give us an interesting opportunity here. We can make the fire giants refugees who fled from the more Roman-styled, expansionistic, empire-building dwarves. The fire giants fled in the wake of their onslaught, just the mass of organized, disciplined dwarves marching and battering their way through the defenses of the fire giants and pushing them out from their traditional homelands. They moved out and away centuries upon centuries, possibly even millennia ago, and now they've resettled in a new region, a volcanic region, something inherently that much more inhospitable. But because they're in a much more inhospitable place and they're more isolated, that isolation they recognize is still a vulnerability for them. So they sought to end their isolation and began trying to find different groups that they could come into contact with and develop more close alliances with. And instead of trying to forge these out of existing materials, they started forging a new alliance out of existing materials. Meaning they are the craftsmen for the first Warforged, and created enough Warforged that the Warforged went on ahead to create their own empire, their own empire styled after the Mughal Empire. So we have all these creatures who were put together to be a buffer zone, a buffer state between the fire giants and the much more violently expansionistic dwarves across the sea. Now, the sea is still an effective barrier in and of itself, but the fire giants no longer want to leave that to chance. They don't want to have to flee another home. So they fortified, they've dug in, they've settled in, and they've literally created allies for themselves. Allies that they have actually formed a genuine bond with. This makes them much more interesting by having them realize these are sentient beings. We created them initially to be foot soldiers, troops, a buffer zone for us, but they have gained and learned so much more. And look at these disparate, colorful peoples that they've turned out to be. They became a group that they legitimately recognized as being sentient and worthy of being treated with respect and as equal thinking beings. So they have a closely forged, genuine alliance there, and this can be an area where the where the Warforged have a unique access and trade, because the fire giants are up in this area with lots of volcanic activity. They have access to minerals and resources that they're able to readily gain that the Warforged cannot, and that many of the other races and cultures cannot get access to. So this is a unique trade route, a unique resource, and a mutually beneficial relationship that these two groups can build upon and use to make give themselves a little bit more leeway and political and financial clout on the larger world stage. So this adds not only more detail to the fire giants, but to the history and legacy of this homebrewed world, and helps us to figure out more of the power structure between all of these different groups. It's a lot. This video ended up being a little bit longer than I thought, but I think that's going to be interesting. And not only that, but the cultural scar that's left for the fire giants, given that they live to be about 350-ish years in age. Certainly they don't live quite as long as the dwarves do, but they're still going to have that long memory, and it's going to be ingrained. This is going to be an event ingrained on their culture. I mean, 350 years. I mean, if this is something that happened a millennia ago, 1,000 years, that's just separated away by 3 fire giants, 3 fire giant lifetimes. And this 3rd or 4th generation of fire giants, they are still going to remember, because they knew their grandfather, great-grandfather, who lived with a parent or had a parent figure in their lives, or people in their lives who remembered this horrific event, the way the dwarves massacred them and just drove them out of their ancestral homes. And this alone will create so many disparate groups, people who are set on forging and continuing their new identity in this new land. And there's also going to be groups that want to further cement their alliance with the Warforged, their Warforged neighbors and allies. Others are going to want to push more for war, go back and reclaim their ancestral home, the place where their bones, the bones of their ancestors, are literally in the earth. They want to reclaim those ancient homes, see those towering spires, gaze upon these lakes of lava, these eternal swirling pools of molten rock and metal. Hell, they might even have ancient accesses to old gates of the fire elemental plane, of the earth elemental plane. So many different possibilities that you can throw in there. But what do you think? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Did you like today's video? Did you dislike it? I ran a little bit longer than intended, but I had a lot of thoughts come to me for this one. Let me know your thoughts down below, and we will engage in discussion. And remember, if you're new here to the channel, then go on down to hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.